morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar, Integrating Intuitive Eating and Health at Every Size in the Residential Treatment Center. I'm Dr. Danielle Cornea. I'm the Clinical Director at Magnolia Creek Treatment Center for Eating Disorders. Here at Magnolia, we treat women 18 and older for eating disorders, co-occurring substance abuse, and mental health diagnoses. And we treat them in the residential and partial hospital levels of care. I'm personally so excited and honored to introduce our speaker, Leigh-Ann Bamberg, our amazing and talented Director of Nutrition Services here at Magnolia Creek. Leigh-Ann is a registered dietitian and is responsible for evaluating clients for nutritional deficiencies and unhealthy food and weight-related behaviors. She also provides nutritional therapy and education to promote recovery and restoration of health. So a little background on Leigh-Ann. She graduated from the University of Mobile with a Bachelor of Science in Human Performance and Exercise Science with a concentration in exercise physiology. She then continued her education at the University of Alabama and earned both a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Food and Nutrition. Having recovered from an eating disorder herself, Leigh-Ann has known from the beginning of her dietetic internship that she wanted to focus on eating disorders and mental health. Leigh-Ann has a strong desire to help others reach recovery and find freedom in food rules and compulsive exercise in the same way that she has personally been able to. With over 6 years of experience in the areas of eating disorders and mental health, she feels very fortunate to play a part in the recovery process. She is a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics as well as the Behavioral Health Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group. Welcome, Leigh-Ann.
Thank you. Thank you for that sweet introduction. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. And I wanted to mention first that when I first started out working in eating disorders and just behavioral health in general, I started at the PHP, IOP, and outpatient levels of care, and I've always approached kind of how I counsel my clients from an intuitive eating and health at every size standpoint. So I had to kind of figure out when I transitioned into the residential level of care what these philosophies would look like with such an acute approach and with such an acute level of care. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to talk first just about the basics of intuitive eating. And so when you hear that word intuitive, we know the book Intuitive Eating. If you have not read the book Intuitive Eating, I'll go ahead and tell you that. So that is written by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich. Highly, highly recommend it. It's great if you're practicing within the eating disorder field, but it's a great book regardless. So when we hear that word intuitive, hopefully the thought that comes to mind with that is instinctive. And so the technical definition for that is using or based on one or how one feels to be true, even without conscious reasoning. So it's your body's instinctive way of knowing how to eat. And so what is intuitive eating? So we know that it's a non-diet approach. It is the way that we are to approach food without having food rules, without viewing food in black and white terms. And it's the default mode. We were all born having a really positive relationship with food and body size. We were born as intuitive eaters. If you think about babies, in their relationship with food, they cry when they're hungry and they stop when they're satisfied. They let you know what they need. And they're very much intuitive eaters. And so we don't go outside of that default mode until diet culture enters the picture. And we'll definitely talk more about that later on in the presentation. And if you have not read the book, Intuitive Eating is based around 10 basic principles, and we'll briefly go over each of those. And it's not linear, it's a constant journey. Intuitive eating and your relationship with food should change, and it does change throughout different seasons of life. And so depending on what season of life you're in, whether it is puberty or high school, college, marriage, those early seasons of marriage, pregnancy, postpartum, whatever it might be, your relationship with food does change. And so intuitive eating is very much based on where you are within that. and it provides freedom with food. And so that word freedom, there's no rules, there's no strings attached. And this is a huge undertaking. We know that that is the end goal. We know that freedom with food and with body image, having a more positive body image is the end goal. And it can take some work to get there. It can definitely take a lot of hard work to get there, but that is the ultimate goal. And so just to run through the 10 basic principles of intuitive eating kind of quickly, I'll read through these. The first one is reject the diet mentality, honor your hunger, make peace with food, challenge the food police, feel and respect your fullness, seek satisfaction and pleasure. That's really important. I have that underlined for a reason. Honor your feelings without using food, respect your body, engage in joyful movement, and honor your body with gentle nutrition. And so specifically within the residential level of care, I think it's really, really important to look at these first 4 to 5 principles. These are the most important. And the first one, reject the diet mentality, that's really first for a reason. And so within that principle, the client really has to decide, where are they within wanting to rid themselves of their eating disorder? Are they really ready to work through the negative thoughts and feelings that they have within their eating disorder? Are they ready to go against what that diet mentality has brought for them? And so often when a client first comes in, if this is something that we're talking about, I'll usually give them an assignment and I'll ask them, I want you to list for me, what has the eating disorder done for you and what has it taken from you? Because I like for them to have a picture of, this is what this is keeping you from. This is what you are missing out on. And typically the things that it's done for them is it's allowed them to really just engage in diet culture and to go further into that hole of despair, that despair that we know that our culture brings to us. The second one, honor your hunger. So a really good question, of course, to ask is, does the client have hunger cues? Because if they've been in any kind of restrictive state or disordered state, it is possible that they don't. It's really common if they don't. And there's really no predetermined amount of time that it takes for those hunger cues to redevelop, and we'll talk more about that as well. But it's really important, of course, for the client to have hunger cues before you can really tackle that principle. You're likely going to work through the first 2 principles, this reject the diet mentality and honor your hunger, for some time, and really until the client has weight restored and cognitively is in a place to be able to discuss and challenge their eating disorder rules and thoughts. And so that third one, make peace with food, this is really important. And again, I mentioned those first 2 and just how cognitively the client needs to be in a healthy place, because that really needs to happen before they can begin to challenge their rules within the eating disorder. They really can't decipher and tease through all of those really difficult thoughts that they've had within their eating disorder if they're not fully nourished and fully weight restored. Definitely makes it a more smooth process if they can really think and function well within that process. And the fourth and fifth one, challenging the food police. So that inner eating disorder voice, being able to distinguish between and differentiate between the eating disorder voice and the recovery voice, and what those sound like. What is the eating disorder telling you? Being able to identify and challenge that. And the fifth one, feel and respect your fullness. So what does fullness feel like, and what is satisfaction? Because there is a difference there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So the basics of intuitive eating. So who does this benefit? We know that intuitive eating can benefit all populations, regardless of whether they've been diagnosed with an eating disorder. So every one of us has in some way been impacted by diet culture, whether it's ads that we see, whether it's someone that we follow on social media. We're all really vulnerable to the impact that it can have. And so again, intuitive eating is the default mode. It's what we're trying to get back to. And so it is really beneficial to get back there in order to have a healthier relationship with food. And so within the eating disorder population, there are several priorities that really have to take precedence over other things. And that first goal is to stop the body and brain starvation. That's really, really a first goal that you have to implement when someone has been in a starvation state. And so I hope when I say starvation that images of emaciation are not or emaciation are not what is coming to mind, because I just want to throw out the reminder that regardless of body size, regardless of whether someone is in a larger body size or a smaller body size, that they can be in a state of starvation. And if they've been in a restrictive state, then it's important to have them eating consistently and to re-nourish them well and to stop that body and brain starvation first. And so I just wanted to point that out. But again, goal number 1 is to stop the body and brain starvation with the purpose of rehabilitating cognitive functioning to optimal levels. And with eating consistently over time, the hunger and fullness cues should redevelop, and this allows clients to begin practicing within that second principle. And ultimately, we are rehabilitating the cognitive functioning to begin to process through negative thoughts and feelings that the client has around food in their body. And over time, they can begin to really challenge those thoughts and those feelings. But of course, number 1, stop the body and brain starvation. Number 2, rehabilitate cognitive functioning to optimal levels. And number 3, so that they can begin to process and challenge through those negative thoughts and feelings. Cognition must be intact before the difficult work of processing through and challenging negative thoughts and emotions can really happen. Okay, so I want to go through the basics of health at every size. And so we know that this is a healthcare philosophy that incorporates intuitive eating, and it acknowledges all of the research that we have that shows that intentional weight loss does more harm than good. Diets are not sustainable, and weight loss outside of where your body needs to be and wants to be is not sustainable. And it seeks to help people improve their health in a weight neutral way. So weight neutral meaning we are not concentrating on weight, whether a person gains weight or loses weight. That is not the focus. And it acknowledges the truth that your health is not dependent on your weight. And so a huge takeaway here within this treatment setting, is that intentional weight loss is harmful. And I would encourage you to ask yourself, how many people do you know right now who are on a diet to quote unquote better their health? We probably all know several people that are doing that, especially with this time of year and the resolutions that have likely been made. But unfortunately, our culture has really been uninformed because this is not a helpful technique. And what we do know is that the failure rate of diets is 95%, and the success rate is 5%. And actually, I think in recent studies, it's been less than that. And so there are not many things that any of us would choose to do that we knew had such a high failure rate. And so it's just really important to acknowledge that and to know that this is not something that will give us feelings of well-being. We know that this is not something that is going to put us on a path to health. And so just to speak to weight neutrality a little bit more, it's important when helping clients work towards overall health that we really pour into them the fact that health is not dependent on weight. And as a culture, we've been told that this is a cause and effect relationship, and that if we are in this specific body size, we're going to be healthy, and if we're in this specific body size, we're going to be unhealthy. But this is not true, and Health at Every Size tells us this and really explains this to us. So the primary goal of Health at Every Size is to promote healthy behaviors for people of all sizes. And this is really important because we know that people of all different body shapes and sizes can have similar health outcomes. And so ultimately that health promoting behaviors lead to better overall health and not our weight status. Our weight status is not what leads to overall health. And so just to kind of go through some principles that Health at Every Size holds. Weight inclusivity, so acknowledging that bodies come in all shapes and all sizes, and this is really beautiful and to be respected. This is really important. Health enhancement, a focus on all of the different factors that can influence health, and acknowledging that physical health is only one aspect of health. I think as a culture, we tend to really focus in on physical health and how do I look and aesthetics around health. But we really have to remember that you cannot put physical health on a pedestal while also sacrificing your mental health. It's so important to look at all of these different aspects that I have listed here, and think about how can I care best for myself in each aspect. So physically, how can I best care for myself? Emotionally, how can I best care for myself? And really asking yourself those questions. Respectful care. So acknowledging again that there is a weight bias that needs to end, and I'm definitely going to talk a little bit more about that bias and just about the stigma around different types of bodies. And eating for well-being, so promoting flexible, individualized eating based on one's hunger cues, satisfaction cues, and cravings. Also, in just knowing that there is a difference between fullness and satisfaction, and we know that fullness is a physical sensation, and that satisfaction is a state of contentment. And so just to explain that a little bit more, an example that I often give my clients is if I am really craving chocolate and all that I have access to are carrots, then eventually eating those carrots, I'm eventually going to feel full. I'm going to feel full at some point, but I'm not going to feel satisfied because it's not what I wanted. It's not chocolate. Carrots and chocolate are not the same thing. And so promoting that flexible eating, promoting the fact that there are no good or bad foods and that there is a difference between fullness and satisfaction. And life-enhancing movement, so joyful movement over rigid, monotonous exercise. So doing things that ultimately will make you feel well. So how do we implement these? So we've discussed the basics of both intuitive eating and health at every size, but I want to touch on how to integrate these early on in an individual's treatment, as well as the benefits and potential barriers when doing this. So as far as implementing these principles at the residential level of care, more specifically during the weight restoration process, that's specifically what I'm going to speak to here. There are some barriers. There are some difficult things to get through. And we know that intuitive eating is the end goal for everyone, but this initial implementation can be really difficult. And so this first one here, relational dynamics and just our diet culture in general. I have diet culture listed here, but when you have a client who has decided to reject that diet mentality and they've adapted an intuitive eating approach and they're doing really well with that, I've seen time and time again when if mom is on a diet or dad is on a diet or roommate or best friend or whoever their primary support system is, it can be really difficult to sway them back to intuitive eating if they feel really challenged by those relationships. If they're doing really well and they have a conversation about that with their loved one and their loved one, goes against it or says, well, I'm doing this diet and it's really working for me, that can be a huge barrier and that can be a huge just trigger and difficulty for them. And so it can definitely be difficult to sway their mindset around food and really have them adapt this approach that we know works whenever there are those difficult dynamics within their relationships. And a lack of hunger cues. So of course, if they have that disconnect from their body and they don't have those hunger cues and they're asking, when are they going to come back and how long does it take to redevelop? Well, there's really no solid answer to that question. It can take different amounts of times for different clients and for different individuals. And so it of course is impossible to honor your hunger, which is principle 2, if you aren't able to first decipher those. And so that can definitely be a barrier if that has not happened yet, if those hunger cues have not redeveloped yet. And restrictions around movement. So just to speak to this a little bit, if exercise and intense movement is the way that someone has chosen to quote unquote cope within their eating disorder, putting restrictions around that will definitely immediately put them on the defense towards intuitive eating or towards these philosophies. And so that also can be a really difficult barrier to overcome. So some benefits to implementation, identifying diet culture and food police. And so this is really important because we know that the benefits to implementing these intuitive eating principles far outweigh the barriers. That is something that we know. But what's really, really helpful, I think, for clients is to be able to challenge those beliefs and those behaviors that they've had within their eating disorder. But first, before they can do that, they have to be able to identify them. And so identifying what is diet culture? What has diet culture taught me? What is my inner food police? What is my eating disorder voice telling me? And in the book Intuitive Eating, if you have not read it, it uses the term unconscious dieting. And so basically what this is when the individual is ready and willing to reject that diet mentality, they are ready and willing to challenge all of these beliefs that they have within their eating disorder. But if they've been in their eating disorder for a long period of time, then they may be unaware of what their behaviors are or what their belief system around food or exercise is outside of their eating disorder. And so that's really where outside intervention comes in, working with a dietitian or a therapist or someone who can help them to identify what those behaviors are so that they can challenge them, because you can't challenge what you aren't aware of. And so really being aware of what those behaviors are and what those thoughts are. And learning to honor hunger cues as they redevelop. If you've never been a part of someone's process or someone's healing where they begin to feel those hunger cues again, that's a really, really neat process. It's a really amazing process because to have a client come to you who hasn't had hunger cues in 2 years and they say, I think I feel hungry and this is what it felt like. That's a really neat process to be able to experience. And cultivating an overall positive relationship with internal cues and food as a whole. So we know that our end goal here is cultivating a really positive relationship with food and their body. But what I want to point out is we are working with we're working for them to provide this freedom for a life absent of rules and rigidity. So not just a moment, not just a week, not just a year. This is really impacting their life and their recovery as a whole. And so that last point, normalizing listening to your body. So I think within the eating disorder community, that is something that has become really common to say, listening to your body. But clients often don't know what this means. And so you kind of have to explain it. And so I've got this little continuum here, and I want you to read it from the right to the left. And that section on the right there, so within their eating disorder, they are engaging in behaviors. This is when they are listening to the eating disorder. Our hope as we work with them and as we incorporate variety and we teach about there's no good foods, there's no bad foods, nothing is off limits. We teach them to enjoy the foods that they love and that make them feel well, and really they're able to have them all the time, and all foods are available to them. The hope is that as they move into this middle section, their recovery voice starts to come in. That healthy, recovery-oriented voice starts to come in and starts to prevail. Maybe there's still some of that eating disorder voice, but they're learning to listen to their healthy voice and to their body. And then, of course, as we continue to implement this, as we continue to educate them, they move to the very left section, which is recovery. That's where those healthy thoughts and those healthy behaviors are really prevailing. And hopefully by that point, they have learned to fully listen to their body. We've normalized that for them, and we've helped that recovery voice to really come out and be the predominant voice that they're hearing and that they're listening to and that they're honoring. So I wanted to include this definition by Ellen Satter. And if you're unfamiliar with Ellen Satter, she is responsible for the creation of the division of responsibility. So when you think of feeding kids and just kind of cultivating an overall positive relationship with food with young children and just as they grow, she is responsible for creating that division of responsibility. And so what that looks like often is parents decide what and when the kids are going to eat, and the kids decide if and how much. And so she has this normal eating definition that she's come out with. And I really, really enjoy it. I think it's the best definition of really intuitive eating that I found. And it really promotes 3 common things. And the first one is eating of all foods. All foods are equal here. All foods are available here. It's very flexible. The second one is unconditional permission. So peace with food. Again, no black and white foods. Foods are not good. Foods are not bad. And we take those labels off. And the third one is body trust. So trusting your body. So she has that third point from the bottom there. Normal eating is trusting your body to make up for your mistakes in eating. And so body trust. And the important thing is these 3 things that you can kind of see throughout her definition are all really important foundations, not only to intuitive eating and an improved relationship with food and body, but also are important foundational concepts within recovery as a whole. So I really enjoy that definition and wanted to make sure that I included that. So the benefits to implementing the principles of intuitive eating. So the benefits, of course, we know, and we've already discussed, they far outweigh the barriers, because again, we're working towards a life free of food rules. And so by discussing with a client how to challenge that eating disorder voice or how to challenge the food police, they must first recognize what that voice is. So who is their food police? How did their eating disorder voice develop? Was it comments made when they were bullied? Was it comments made from a parent or a sibling or a friend? Where did this voice come from? And again, we also want to teach them that hunger cues are a positive sign, and they're not something to be afraid of. When those start to redevelop, this is something to be honored and to be really excited about. And of course, speaking with them in one-to-one sessions, and again, I want to reiterate this, is we're talking with them on how to cultivate a better relationship with food. And it's not just to heal their eating disorder or disordered eating, but really to cultivate a healthy relationship with food and body for life. And I think that's important to point out, because if you think within our culture, there are several people who have not necessarily been diagnosed with an eating disorder, but if you were to ask them, they probably would not tell you that they have a healthier relationship with food. And so that is really our goal. That is our goal. We, of course, want to help them heal from their eating disorder, but ultimately, we want to help them to have a healthy relationship with food. So education is really, of these principles of intuitive eating and health at every size, education is really key to integration and implementation. So integrating the health at every size philosophy. So integrating this at the residential level of care, and again, more specifically during the weight restoration process, it can be really difficult due to clients' mindsets often being very weight focused. So we know that weight neutrality, meaning that whether you gain weight or you lose weight or you stay the same weight, it's not something that we're focusing on. That can be a really difficult concept to grasp if within your eating disorder, that's all that you focused on. And so it's difficult because clients likely feel safer at a certain weight, and they might start hearing those alarm signals go off when reaching a totally different weight or when they start to feel their body changing. I know that I've had several clients make the assumption that weight neutrality equates to weight gain in treatment. If I hear, weight neutrality, that means that you're going to make me gain weight and you're trying to make me feel better about it. That's something that I hear really, really often, but it's important to remember that this assumption almost always comes from a place of fat phobia, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well. But when this happens, it's important to review the concepts and the research behind health at every size. And that is that all people can have similar health outcomes regardless of body size. And fat phobia is a difficult bias to overcome for clients and for health practitioners. And it's really something that there needs to be more education around, and it needs to be discussed a little bit more. And so I'd really try to talk to clients about how a large body is not bad, and it does not mean that someone is not healthy. And a small body does not equal good and does not equal healthy. And so those are really, really common misconceptions in our society. And so I really try to pour that into them as well. So integrating the health at every size philosophy. So for education's sake, it's important to educate clients on several different things. And one of them being every, quote unquote, every in health at every size does not imply that there is no such thing as an unhealthy weight. But it does acknowledge the truth that being above or below your body's genetic set point can be a cause for concern when discussing your overall health and well-being. So we note that weight does not paint the full picture. Our culture would tell us something very different than that, but we know that our health is not dependent on our weight. There are several different factors that contribute to our health. Our socioeconomic status, our support system, what resources we have available to us, the behaviors that we engage in, whether we're sleeping well, our stress levels, just so many different factors that contribute to our overall health. And what health at every size tells us is that health and well-being are just this system of several different factors, and weight potentially being one of them. But the overwhelming research proves to us that behaviors and health promoting behaviors are a much better predictor of health outcomes than weight alone. And so again, people with all different body sizes can have similar health outcomes. And so the primary benefits to integrating this early on. So I think it's really important to provide education on weight status early on. Educating clients on the basics of the set point theory, I think, is really, really important, because this answers, if you work in this field, you've probably heard this question. If I keep eating and eating and eating, won't I keep gaining and gaining and gaining? Really, really common question as clients start to restore weight. And of course, we know the answer to that is no. There are several different factors that go into that. Your body is able to rest comfortably within a certain range, and that is your set point range. And genetically, that is where you are designed to be. And so I think giving education on set point often is really comforting for clients, because it can allow them to rest in the fact that their body is going to be where it needs to be. And we really can't control that. And so we can take that control piece out and rest assured that our body is going to stay within the range that it was genetically supposed to be in the first place. And defining and challenging weight stigma and fat phobia. So challenging any prejudice against quote unquote fatness and larger bodies, and teaching and implementing health promoting behaviors. And so we just named a few of these, but ultimately self-care, sleep, stress or anxiety management, healthy relationships. We know that all of these lead us on a better path to health. And again, just providing education on weight status early on. So the set point theory, just to kind of go through the basics of the set point theory, simply put, this is the weight range that your body likes the best. And it is controlled by a section of your brain, and it sends signals to manipulate different eating and activity habits to ultimately maintain metabolic efficiency, again, in an effort to keep you where you're supposed to be. And so set point weight, we know that can be maintained without any conscious effort on our parts at all. So it's maintained to be a homeostasis. There are several different feedback and regulatory mechanisms that keep your body where it needs to be. And of course, once hunger and fullness cues have been restored, you maintain set point by being able to honor those hunger cues and honor those fullness cues, as well as cravings in the best way that you can care for yourself within that relationship with food. So I want to talk about just weight stigma and fat phobia for just a minute. And one of my favorite questions to ask when I'm presenting on this topic is, if you've ever read the book by Linda Bacon, Body Respect, she begins that very first chapter by asking the question, how do you know what you know? And I really love this question because it's good to ask ourselves as health practitioners. It's good to ask clients. And often when I have a new client, I'll have them, if they have several food rules that we need to discuss, I'll have them do an assignment listing their food rules or their rules for themselves within the eating disorder. And I will ask them this question: how do you know that? How do you know what you know? Who told you that you can't eat past 6 p.m.? Who told you that you only need 1,200 calories? And so I say that to say, how do we know what we know? How do we know, or why do we think that certain bodies are less than others or less important than others? Most likely the beliefs that are surrounding the bias against people in larger bodies that there tends to be, it's been cultivated by our culture, by a culture drowning in eating disorder habits. And so it's really important to help our clients correct these disordered thought patterns, and we do that by implementing these philosophies. It's really, really important. And so quote unquote fat is not bad, and the thin ideal is not good. And we know that bodies come in all shapes and sizes, and that is so, so important. And education on that and acceptance are so key to ending that stigma around fat phobia. And I also wanted to point out, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and if you've ever heard of the actress Andrea Barber, you may know her best as Kimmy Gibbler on Full House, but she was on a podcast talking about her most recent book. She just recently wrote a book, and in it she documented some struggles that she has had with depression and anxiety, and not necessarily an eating disorder, but just some co-occurring mental health struggles. And she said something that I thought was really powerful. And she said, silence gives rise to stigma. And that is so true. If you remain silent about certain things, the stigma wins. But if you use your voice that you have within this community and within our culture, you can end those stigma and you can go against that fat phobia. And I thought that was really powerful, and I really appreciated that she said that. So silence gives rise to stigma. So going against that, using your voice, advocating for what we know to be true, and that is that all people can have similar health outcomes regardless of body size. And so I wanted to point out in this article, Weight Science Evaluating the Evidence for a Paradigm Shift, it noted that recent trials have indicated that health at every size approaches have led to clinically significant improvements in physiological measures, health behaviors, and psychosocial outcomes. So ultimately, pointing out what we know to be true, that health promoting behaviors lead to increased body acceptance. And there's actually several other studies that also suggest that intuitive eaters have higher levels of body satisfaction and higher levels of emotional regulation and functioning. And so I think that's really important to point out as well. So the barriers to integrating this philosophy, when weight restoration must be the primary focus, because we know with some of our population that does have to be the case. And a really, really common question that I get, I've got it listed here, is why is my size not included in every size? And this is a very valid question. I first want to point that out. It's very, very valid. Especially when someone's cognitive functioning may not be where it needs to be, or if their body dysmorphia is at an all-time high and fully intact, then this is a really valid question. I've had this question even in the last week from a client. It's very common. So why is my size not included in every size? And so I think the way that we answer this question, again, is with education and with consistency within that education. So again, pointing out that the word every does not imply that there's no such thing as an unhealthy weight. It just tells us that being severely above or below your body's genetic set point is a cause for concern, in regards to your health. And so if health is is the goal, if that's what we're aiming towards, then this is a concern. And of course, providing education, providing that education begins to help them shift their thoughts and their focus around their body size. And they really need to be made aware during that initial phase of treatment, the goals that we've previously talked about. That first goal is to stabilize their relationship with food in their body and to stop the body and brain starvation. And once that is accomplished, and that is such a huge task and such a huge undertaking and really a difficult part of this process, but once it's accomplished, they will be better able to learn and accept a shift in their previous ways of thinking. And so the best way to overcome this barrier sometimes is just recognizing and acknowledging that you may just be providing education for them until that weight restoration has been accomplished. And I think the best way to answer this question is to reiterate those principles to them and to reiterate that let's focus on behaviors that we can implement. Let's focus on the fact that implementing these health promoting behaviors for yourself and managing stress and managing anxiety and eating consistently and really learning to take care of yourself is more important at this point. So let's focus on those things. What can we do? And again, providing them that education on set point, and sometimes they need that to be able to fall back on and knowing that their body can rest well when they're taking care of themselves. And a good question to also ask is, can the client accept that their ideal set point and their body's genetic set point may be different? And they likely are. They likely are at that point of their treatment. And can you also accept that there are many different aspects to health other than simply physical health? And again, going back to the fact that our culture tends to really focus on aesthetics and physical health when there are so many other things to look at and to take care of. So, and just to point out regarding the weight neutrality, we really need to begin focusing on those health promoting behaviors and not numbers themselves. And just helping clients to understand that those are what help us to become healthier. Those are what lead us on a better path to health. And health is not based on a number or a specific body size. And again, health at every size is not saying anyone is healthy at any size, but it is confirming the evidence that we have showing that people can have similar health outcomes at a variety of body shapes and sizes. So what can we do as health professionals in this field? What can we do? As clinicians, it is important that we maintain a weight-neutral view of health when working with our clients. If you have doubts about intuitive eating or health at every size, I would really encourage you to read both of those books. I would also really encourage you to read the book Body Respect and to remain open-minded and to work towards educating yourself on these philosophies. That is so important. And being informed of weight stigma and remaining educated on the topic of weight bias is so vital to our field. We can also and should also be modeling intuitive eating behaviors and promoting the belief that all foods are equal. There are no good foods and there are no bad foods. And clients should see you modeling what they are working towards. That's really helpful for them. And adopting a health at every size framework within your practice. So adopting this philosophy and really focusing on the fact that you can help your client get to a better relationship with food and with their body size, but it really starts with us. We have to consider our own values and if we have those prejudices, we really need to be able to use our voice to go against those biases and against those prejudices and really work towards adopting an overall health at every size and intuitive eating focused framework so that we can better help our clients do the same. So just some key points here. Sometimes while weight restoration has to be the first priority early on in an individual's treatment, especially at such an acute level of care, intuitive eating is really the end goal for all clients. The health at every size philosophy can and should be implemented into a client's treatment plan in the early stages of treatment. And early education on both intuitive eating and health at every size principles are key to cultivating a long-term successful relationship with food and body size. And just as a last point, as a last reminder, your body was created, and this is something that I tell clients all the time, your body was created for a purpose far greater than an eating disorder. And so really helping to pour into them the fact that they do have a purpose far greater than that. And so I think that wraps up the presentation, but I think we have a few minutes for questions. So Suzanne, if you have any questions that you want me to look over.
Questions yet? There was a comment made during your presentation from one of our attendees making the statement that the author, previously known as Linda Bacon, has recently come out as non-binary, and she does go by Lindo Bacon now, and as well as using the they, them pronouns. So that is correct. And when searching for the book, of course, it's published under the name Linda Bacon, if you guys are looking for that book.
Yes, thank you so much for pointing that out. So I recently learned that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I actually recently learned that she has started going by Lindo Bacon, but I wanted to make sure to point out that on her book, if you are searching on Amazon or Googling trying to look for that book, it will be under Linda Bacon, but she has changed her website as well. So her website is Lindo Bacon. So that's very important to point out. So.
Okay, we do have a question. Barbara's asking, do some clients with long-term eating disorders not ever restore hunger cues? And how do you implement intuitive eating then?
Let's see. So do some clients with long-term eating disorders not ever restore hunger cues? So I have never had this happen. That's a really good question. I have had clients where it takes a little bit longer. And so it can take anywhere from a couple of weeks, I've seen that, up to a year. And I think what's important to remember with that is if they've been in their eating disorder for a really long time, we can't expect everything to be fully restored within a really short period of time. It can take some time for everything to kind of restore and get back to where it should be. So back within that set point. And so I have never had anyone who has not had hunger cues redevelop, but I think that if that were the case, we could still kind of implement those principles, maybe not the honor your hunger one as much, but as far as self-care goes, being able to care for themselves as far as eating consistently throughout the day. So, you know, eating 3 meals and 3 snacks or whatever that looks like for them, and just maintaining a consistent routine of eating.
Okay, great. And here's another question. How do we discuss health promoting behaviors without the patient eating disorder not making black and white rules around it and or moral associations with health?
So good question. I think that within the eating disorder, as far as the black and white rules, trying to get away from those and really challenge those, it really starts out slowly. And so I kind of mentioned that assignment that I often do with them on listing out their food rules and listing out the rules that they have for themselves within their eating disorder and how we challenge those. So really going one by one and saying, this is a rule that you have for yourself. These are these black and white rules that you've had for yourself. And so maybe an example is they've decided that they're not going to eat past 7 o'clock. And so we challenge that and we eat PM snack at 8 o'clock or whatever that might look like. And just being able to challenge those rules as much as possible to get away from those black and white terms and get a little bit more into that gray area.
Okay, and how do you approach the question from a client, how do I make sure I follow the meal plan and practice intuitive eating?
Oh, I love this question. So I have a good analogy for this question because this is something that I get asked a lot, actually. So within that question, what I tell clients is when you do come to treatment, you do have a meal plan at first. And so that can seem really rigid. We try to, at Magnolia Creek, we try to make it as flexible as possible. And we kind of tell clients, you have these, you know, these food groups that you have to have at this snack, but here's your list of different things you can have so they can kind of practice listening to their cravings within that. But I always paint the picture that your meal plan is essentially your cast. And I think this analogy came from Christy Harrison's Food Psych podcast, so I won't take credit for this. But if you were to break your leg, and they had to put you in a cast, they would not expect you to just walk out the door. They're going to put a cast on your leg to help you heal. And so when you come into treatment, essentially your hunger cues, your behaviors within your relationship with food are broken. And so your meal plan is your cast to help you heal. We don't expect them to be on a meal plan for the rest of their life, but we do want that to help them heal within their relationship with food.
Okay, let's talk about stomach pain. Patients who report stomach pain after meals, and how do you encourage them that fullness is a normal, healthy feeling?
Yep. So I would point them to, so we keep the intuitive eating books on hand. So I would point them to the principle on feel and respect your fullness, because fullness a lot of times can bring up, it may be stomach pain or it may be other emotional pain that it brings up for them. And so helping them to decipher, is this physical or is this emotional pain? And being able to kind of help them realize that being full is normal. That's an okay feeling. And that can even be a feeling of self-care. And so again, just kind of normalizing that for them and allowing them to learn how to feel that and how to respect that, because it can be really, really scary to feel full if you're used to being in a state of restriction.
Thanks. And how do you move away from a meal plan to teach patients how to intuitively eat without unintentionally restricting?
So routine. Routine would be the biggest thing that I would say about that. So when our clients go to our partial program, what I try to start implementing with them are the kind of those principles of intuitive eating. They still have a meal plan to fall back on, but they have their breakfast and their PM snacks independently. And so I kind of tell them, you've got the option to follow these food groups for your breakfast and for your PM snack, but I want you to try to listen to what you would like to have instead. So what feels best for you. So if you want a Pop-Tart and a yogurt and a glass of milk, and that doesn't necessarily fall into those food groups that you have on your meal plan, that's okay. That is completely okay. And so I try to just move them more towards just kind of those intuitive eating principles one by one, and just allowing them to do that, but also ensuring and maintaining that they have a consistent routine of eating, and that they're not letting themselves fall into that, leading to that unintentional restriction.
Great. All right, last question, unless you guys send some more in. Where did the statistic about the 95% failure rate originate?
So I can't give you an exact study. I will look for it. If we can send out, when we send out the CE certificates, maybe I can send a link to that study. But that was the most recent study that I read on the failure rate of diets. So that's a pretty common statistic, but if I can find a study where I read that, then I will definitely send that on. Good question.
And I think that wraps up our Q&A, unless we get any in a few seconds. Oh wait, here's one more. Thanks, Holly. Our team works with children and adolescents. Any advice on how to communicate these principles to parents who are resistant to them?
Good question. So I would first point them, again, the book is a good resource. The intuitive eating book is a really good resource. Health at Every Size is a good resource, but for children and adolescents specifically, I would actually point them to Ellen Satter. So I included her definition of normal eating within the presentation, but again, she created that division of responsibility. And she also has, she's recently published some things on ARFID and just different eating disorders within children and adolescents. And so I would actually, I think the best resource within that population would be to point them towards Ellen Satter and her studies.
Awesome. Okay, and Barbara's asking, do you have any other resources available, podcasts, books, etc., that we can read or provide to patients? What do you suggest?
So Food Psych with Christy Harrison is my #1 resource. In the book Intuitive Eating, the book Body Kindness by Rebecca Scritchfield, Body Respect, Health at Every Size, of course. I think as far as the podcast, that would be my #1, but I would also say just as far as social media, being on social media, there are so many really, really good Health at Every Size and intuitive eating focused social media panels. I'm specifically talking about Instagram. If you go on Instagram, there's a really, really good platform there for eating disorder recovery. And so if you look up the hashtags intuitive eating, Health at Every Size, body positivity, you're going to find a lot of really good sources for that. And most of them will be healthcare practitioners. Not all of them, but most of them will be. And so you know that your source will be good. So I would really point you there so that you kind of what you're taking in on that social media will be body positive and intuitive eating focused. So I think that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much, all of you who logged on to listen. We really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, we can get those answered. If you want to shoot Suzanne Arnett an email, she can forward those to me, and we can continue that conversation. But thank you so much for logging on.